Tim, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Yeah, I'm excited
it's a
to be
delight.
here. I've been looking forward to it.
You know, I've been reading your books and listening to you talk for, I think, a good part of the last decade. And I've always wanted to understand because I think if I were to start mapping how you think, I would have to ask you how you see life. And maybe the options I give are kind of cartoonish, but for you, is life like an experiment that has to be performed, or a journey that has to be lived, or a truth that has to be understood, or a story that has to be told?
That was a great question. I think it's probably, depending on the day and how much caffeine I've had, all of the above. I would say it's also a game that you get to self-author from the perspective of game designer. And what I mean by that is it is not just a game to play or a game to be won. It's a game where you get to create the rules by and large. There's some constraints, sure. But I think our agency and ability to self-author is really underestimated, typically, right? And that can manifest as a willingness to experiment in different ways, to kind of push at the edges and boundaries of things. So I think that's a tool in service of that broader way of framing, right? So that I suppose is one way that I would
So it's a game.
look at it. Yeah, I think
Does it have levels?
I think almost anything we do is a game. Not necessarily.
No,
Could
it's a
just-
single level game.
Yeah, could be
Yeah.
like it could, and the game doesn't have to be winning the U.S. Open or whatever it might be. It could just be, volleying with a couple of friends you really like and
Right.
like weekend games of tennis, but learning how to play that game to the best of your ability, given what you want to get out of it. It doesn't need to be
One dimension.
accolades, doesn't need to be money. You get to choose by and large, right? There's a book called The Man Who Quit Money about this gentleman who very, very smart, very well read, just kind of decided to opt out of money in the United States. Like, how do you even begin to do that, right? And it's his story. It's like, huh. And when you read it, you're like, that seems kind of crazy on a lot of levels. I don't think I want to be him. But it forces you to re-examine a lot of the things that we take as the water we swim in, right? These are things that are completely unavoidable. It's like, no, you have choices. You have a lot more choices than you might think. And I would say that when you subconsciously or consciously contort yourself into the rules of everyone else's games or some societal game or some business game, a lot of the pains are from that. It's not because they're unavoidable, right? There's a lot of unnecessary suffering. So for me, it's like, if there's a lot of suffering and friction, like, could I just say no to this thing? It's like, oh, it turns out like today, I can't get into details, but like it's very huge, like possible, amazing business project. And I just found myself chafing with like certain communications and like personality styles weren't really meshing well, even though on paper it's like one of the greatest things ever. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do it. So just sent an email and I was like, oh, look at that. Rather than trying to improve my communication and ask them and working on our conflict styles and doing this and this, it's like, no, I just don't want to play that game. It's like, okay, guys, I'm just going to step away from the board game that we've set up here and I'm going to go do something else.
Is it realistic to say that maybe now that you've played enough games, won a few big ones as well, maybe lost a few, maybe checked out of a few, that you have more of an ability to not play the next game or choose? Does that change?
It does change. I mean, I think the counter or what someone might say is, oh, well, it must be nice, right? Yeah,
Right.
you've done X, Y, and Z. But from the very beginning, I have tried to, and I'm sure I learned this from mentors or teachers, or maybe it's entrepreneurs whose stories I read, the Richard Bransons of the world and so on, early on, reading Losing My Virginity and these books, where you're like, wow, okay. That's interesting. People think about launching airlines as this really risky, complicated things, but not if you negotiate the way that he did with like buybacks and capping your downside. It's like, oh, I didn't realize you could do that. So similarly, like when I wrote my first book, when the 4-Hour Workweek was eventually being bought, I mean, it was turned down by something like 26 publishers, but when it was eventually being bought, a couple things occurred to me. I didn't have a lot of leverage. I had no leverage, zero. But would I try to do a multi-book deal or a one-book deal? I was like, no multi-book deals. That just became kind of a policy for me, and I can explain why. But a lot of writers do multi-book deals. And then furthermore, what happens with most books? They are hardcover, then a year and a half later, they come out in paperback. I've never had any of my books go to paperback. Why? If you ask an author why they want to go to paperback, they don't really have a great answer for it. It's just that's the way it's always been done. And what ends up happening if you go to paperback, for instance, and every deal is a little different, but they're more or less along these lines. You have a paperback, let's say if it sells well, you get up to 15% royalties, okay? As soon as you go to paperback, that gets chopped down to like 6.5 or 7.5. So what does that mean? That means that you need to sell twice as many books to make the same amount of money. All right, what is the purported benefit to the end user? It's a cheaper book. But that applies maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago, but now we have Kindle. Now they have Pirate Bay. If they want cheaper, they can find cheaper. I don't have to go to paperback for them to find cheaper.
Right. They can go for free.
It makes no sense.
Right.
So like net, it makes no sense to the reader in terms of their benefits or to me as a writer who's trying to make it self-sustaining to go to paperback, right? So those are examples of things that I in some ways kind of chanced upon just looking at it through different lenses where I had no leverage. I did not have leverage in those situations.
But then accumulating leverage does probably help say no to things that might otherwise be uncomfortable. Because that's my experience as a younger person in that way is that some games I kind of have to play. Although I might choose not to, but I have to kind of play.
Well, there are also, and I suppose, yes, to echo a friend of mine named Derek Sivers, a really fascinating entrepreneur. He spends time in India. You might want to chat with him at some point. He was the founder of something called CD Baby, which is essentially the independent iTunes way back in the day. And he sold that company, but he's really a philosopher, programmer, recluse in a way. Donated almost all of the proceeds to a charitable trust for music education. One of a kind. Interesting dude.
Right.
And he, more so than even me, would say, you always have options, right? And I'm like, well, what about taxes? He's like, you don't have to pay taxes. He's like, there are going to be consequences.
But you
don't have to, but you have the option, right? And he's really pushed me to go places that are uncomfortable. With the recognition, I would say, right? If you want to be part of society in some sense, you're going to have to do stuff that you wouldn't pay to do, right? Do I love like going over stuff with my accountant and like paying taxes and all that? No, I don't love it. It's just, that's part of what I do that allows me to do the other things that
it's like a membership card for society.
Yeah, it's like a membership card, right? It's like, and I remember somebody said to me at one point, it might have been Robert Rodriguez, the filmmaker, who's here in Austin. Great guy, amazing. And basically like all of the stuff you like about your job, that's the stuff you get to do for free. What you actually get paid for is the stuff that you don't really like to do. And it's a very healthy way to think about it, right? Like all that fun stuff, that's for free.
Right.
And it's like the job, in quotation marks, is like fixing things when they break and dealing with all that, right? So of course there's going to be that. I would say that people, and this is not me on high after success saying this, underestimate how much agency they have, right? And when I look back at, say, case studies and success stories from the 4-Hour Workweek, which is going to have its 20th anniversary next year. So I've got hundreds and thousands of case studies that I've sent in. These are people who are like single moms, no income, people on food stamps, no leverage. Like if you looked at them, you would not think they have any leverage. There's still a surprising amount of room to maneuver. And these people have done amazing things, right? They're not necessarily building a company that they take public or something, but who cares? A lot of those people are miserable too. So that's a separate conversation. But I would just say broadly speaking, like within the game of life, you get to define a lot of the terms and you get to define the win conditions. So you can make yourself miserable by playing the game of life really well, but you have unclear win conditions, right? You have these goalposts that keep moving or everybody's got to bend to your will. Guess what? The world doesn't really work that way. So you're basically agreeing to be unhappy forever.
Right.
It's a bad win condition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Kars, who wrote, I guess the title is what, Finite and Infinite Games. That's worth taking a look at. There are people who've written about this stuff before and spoken about it before, so I'm leaning on them. And the older I get, the more examples I see, the more startups I work with, because that's a much bigger piece of what I do financially than the podcast or the books or anything like that. The more you see people do things in a very unorthodox way and they make it work. And that's super exciting to me. Like it's
kind of funny though, huh?
Yeah.
You kind of have to break the rules to have a moonshot. And then it changes the way you look at the game. Like somebody really does something outstanding because they were really out of the box.
Yeah. I would add to that and say that breaking the rules doesn't necessarily mean, or starting to bend the rules and look at the edges of it does not have to include a lot of risk, right? So the stories that we often hear about entrepreneurship is like, you bet the farm and it worked out, and like Elon taking all the money he made from PayPal and everything else and like putting it at risk with Tesla and SpaceX and so on, sleeping on a cot. And it's like, wow, those are inspiring. And like Elon is impressive without a doubt. But there's a survivorship bias, right? You hear about, and there's a bias just towards these like tales of courage and insane burning of the ships and so on. But the vast majority of business people who I have met who are not in venture-backed startup land are really good at mitigating risk, right? A lot of them start tinkering and experimenting with their own company while they still have a job, right? They start working a little at evenings, and then they start working on the weekends, and then they get to a point where they're like, wow, I'm actually getting to the point where I can cover my costs without this other job that I don't love. Let's give it a full-time shot. And if it doesn't work out, maybe I can still get rehired by my former employer, or certainly go back to the same industry. It's actually very low risk if we look at it as risk being the likelihood of an irreversible negative outcome. It's not that risky, right? So I don't, most of what I do, I wouldn't view as risky. And if it ends up in retrospect, I'm like, wow, that was risky, then I probably made a bad decision. But I try not to do those. Like I look at what I do as pretty low risk. Like I'm very hyper vigilant around risk. I don't enjoy Russian roulette. I don't enjoy going to the craps table. It's not for me.
I think what I'm hearing, and tell me if this summarizes it properly, is that you see life as a game or a series of games. And what you're surprised by is how flexible some of the rules might be, that people can actually self-author it all the way through. You always have options, and there is enough agency even in the corners, and you can utilize that agency in a way that really mitigates risk. That, you might find that there are business deals to be made that are not that risky, that will still make you rich. And that kind of stuff.
Yeah, or rich enough.
Yeah, because rich is so variable.
Yeah.
But given that is the case, how do you see AI? Like if life is a series of games, what is AI?
Yeah, so I'm sighing because I do think about this a lot, and I'm an investor in a bunch of companies that have AI somewhere in their slide deck and things like that. Thus far, AI to me strikes me like alcohol, power, money, or increasing headcount at a company. They're all amplifiers, right? So if you have bad habits, if you have insecurities you want to reinforce through a confirmation bias by the way that you prompt LLMs or something else, those can all amplify whatever is already there. And if you have very inefficient processes within a company and you're like, okay, I can't afford a bunch of employees, but I'm going to add 1,000 AI agents. I think it's going to make things worse, probably, right? If you don't have clarity around what you're trying to do, and you're not clear on your absolute top priorities and win conditions, I think AIs are going to make things worse for you, probably. And you can look at some old books like The Mythical Man Month. That was one of, I think probably still is, one of Larry Ellison's favorite books. And he gave a copy of that, I believe, to Mark Benioff when Benioff, now famous of Salesforce, worked for Ellison. I think I'm getting that right. And in effect, it just says if you add more people to a software project, if it's not well designed, it's going to take longer, right? And you just multiply it out. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think AI is very similar. One of the main differences, I mean, there are a lot of differences, right? But one of the main differences is suddenly everybody has the capacity. Like previously, it's like most people are not running ambitious software development projects. But now it's like everybody can create an infinite amount of distracting, busy work and an infinite number of labyrinths that they can put themselves into, you know, like a rabbit in a maze trying to chase something around. So I do think that something is, if you're going to use AI, I would say if somebody is kind of new to, and there are exceptions to everything I'm saying, but it's like going back to some of the golden oldies, like The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. This is like back when he was using, you know, legal pads and so on. And just like read these books on how to choose the right things before you try to get good at doing a lot of things, even with technical assistance, right? And this is something that's really clear. You see it with hiring, you see it with virtual assistants, right? The 4-Hour Workweek talked a lot about virtual assistants, but it's like the progression in the 4-Hour Workweek is define. It's DEAL, right? Deal. Definition. Number 1. What are you trying to accomplish? Can you quantify it? Not everything needs to be quantified, but like it's helpful in some cases if you quantify. Then elimination, right? Getting rid of as much as possible. Only then do you start to automate, right? The few remaining necessary processes. And then liberation is a whole separate thing, which relates to lifestyle design that we could talk about. But certainly, I think for the vast majority of people, this sort of techno-utopian vision of everyone enjoying the vast majority of their day as leisure time is completely ridiculous. That's never been the case. It will not be the case with AI. I've seen no proof whatsoever that will be true. Like, I've got a lot of friends who are very capable entrepreneurs, serial winners in a lot of cases, who are like losing sleep and sleeping 4 hours a night because they're playing with these tools and using Claude Code and feel like there's this closing window and they need to build because they're going to miss their big chance. Like, there's a lot of that I can point to. Is that improving their quality of life? No. I mean, they're running on like adrenaline and cortisol, right? And that's awesome for a while,
right? But it gets tiring after a while. Starts breaking at you after a while.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you know, there's a time to sprint and there's a time to do that kind of thing. But suffice to say, I don't think that these tools inherently make anyone's results better.
I think that's a solid claim, no? I mean, this probably sounds like a hot take almost. Because the common wisdom is that, well, at least the way the job markets are looking at it and the way employers and employees are looking at it, it's almost like there seems to be no way out of the AI curve in companies and markets. Seems to be the thing coming, and it would only be true if there was economic value to be made out of it. That only if it would make things better would it be adopted.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of better for whom, right? And so will there be massive job loss? I think that's inevitable. I completely disagree with people who are very brilliant, but I mean, shilling their own bags in the sense that they tend to have massive AI investments. And so they're trying to sway policymakers and so on with their...
There seems to be a lot of that.
You know, pats on the head and everything's going to be okay. In fact, everything's going to be better. But I have a lot of skepticism around the claim that no one needs to worry because everyone's going to be reskilled, and look at the Industrial Revolution and so on and so forth. Like, these comparables just fall apart as soon as you start taking a magnifying glass to history and what actually happened. That said, if you're a McKinsey or a law firm or fill in the blank, right, whoever, JP Morgan, Chase, right? Can you get rid of lots and lots and lots and lots of employees probably using agents? Yeah, for sure. Is that going to deliver more to the bottom line for earnings calls and so on? Like, yeah, probably. So there will be winners for sure. there are going to be a lot of winners, and we'll have, one person, two person, $1 billion companies without question. But that doesn't mean that on every individual case basis, when you use these tools, you're going to have a bigger, better business or a better life. I just don't think that's a foregone conclusion.
Sure.
So like anything, it's a tool. So TBD, but I mean, that's my take. I feel very confident in everything that I just said. Once we get into like, what does the future of AI look like? I'm like, oh, maybe not the right guy to ask.
Sure.
Right?
I hear you.
But even the people who are developing these tools, I know a lot of them. I mean, this is the first time that I'm aware of in history where if you create something to the best of your abilities, instead of it giving you an output that is predictable that you would have had in the initial scope of the product, like it's doing things that are unpredictable. So even the people at the vanguard, if you're like, what does this look like 3 years from now? I mean, they have very informed guesses, and they're going to be hopefully more accurate than my guesses. But like, we're in very uncharted waters, right?
Are any of these conversations scary?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Is there in the vanguard? Is there questions about this being a genie that comes out of the bottle and there's no way to put it back, kind of thing?
Yeah, the whole like Elon summoning the demon type thing. I would say that a lot of these conversations are really scary, and but that is, to leave it at that is disabling, right? Because having a dystopian view of the future and a position of nothing we do matters is very, it's very disempowering, and it doesn't lead to action, right? So whether you say we can't do anything to change it or everything is going to be all right, like the outcome's kind of the same for most people, which is they don't do anything.
Right.
So if I'm trying to bias towards action, then I am trying to think about what we can do individually. I think that's the most relevant for most people, right? Like trying to steer AI in the right direction to be aligned with human interests. Like that's a job for somebody else. Frankly, like if most people listening to this podcast, including me, are not in a position to
align AI,
change the direction that goes. So then what do? Well, you can decide personally, right, for your own mental well-being and like personal, familial, and business flourishing. How do you think about using these tools or not using these tools? I think that's a more interesting question for most folks because it's actionable.
That the exact reason why I sort of led you into the series of questions is that I would have thought that the AI revolution enables the 4-hour work week on steroids. You know what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah,
as far as leverage is concerned.
For some people, for sure.
Right. And my sense was that you would have thought that if 4-hour work week was possible, 15, 20 years, 10 years ago?
Almost 20 years ago.
Almost 20 years ago. Then now we have the ability to do a 40-minute work week. You know what I'm saying? I mean it in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between having the ability and the possibility and the will and discipline. I think those are two different things. So most people listening to this could work out an hour a day at the gym. They could figure out, like if somebody said, I'm going to kill you and your family unless you do this for the next year, you'd figure out a way.
Yeah.
And everything would probably be better off for it.
Right.
But most people don't. And similarly, pre-AI, 20 years ago, looking at the 4-hour work week, and certainly working with tons of startups and businesses since, if you don't have a certain defined win condition, for instance, if you don't define, this is what I want my life for me and my family to look like, it costs this much per month, therefore my goal outside of this job that I don't particularly love is to create something, I call it a muse in the book, but let's just call it a business, that provides that monthly amount so that instead of living to work at this job 9 to 5 that I'd prefer not to do, I can work to live, right? So I hit this goal of TMI, target monthly income of $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 a month, whatever. And that allows me and my family to do these other things. If you don't go through that exercise what I have seen almost without exception is that people just have the goalposts continue to move in terms of how much they want to make or what accolades they want to accrue to impress an ever lofty peer group. And then if they do get to the point where they can't really with a straight face say, I need to work more, they have some big exit, they have an IPO, or they just create a great cash flow business that's kicking off more than they ever could have dreamed. They have a void to contend with, right? So very often in that process with moving goalposts, they've let all of their other or many of their other interests and activities and friendships and so on atrophy. And so they end up with this void. I mean, how many entrepreneurs do you know who try to retire and then it's like a month later, they're back in the game starting another startup? Why is that? If I'm painting it with a positive light, I would say, well, it's because they're a working dog. They're like a border collie. Like you can't have a border collie locked up in your apartment. It's going to chew the couch. It needs a job. It needs something to do. Okay, sure. But another way to look at it, and they're not mutually exclusive, would say the only thing that they know how to do really well, that they have confidence in, that they've tied their entire identity to, is sixth gear company building. That's it. And when you take that away, there's too much vertigo. And like I've been there myself, so I'm not just pointing fingers at people. It's like, so you need to sort of plan in advance to contend with that. The way this ties into AI is that now you have a tool that allows you to compulsively feel productive by doing a lot of things. And people will choose that over any degree of uncertainty or discomfort from a void. So I would bet my entire net worth that this whole people are going to have this excess of leisure time that the world has never known.
That's bullshit.
Bullshit. I see no historical evidence of that from any technological innovation. And I mean, sure. Now people might say, look, we don't have serfs in the fields plowing and providing protection money to feudal lords, do we? And I'd be like, yeah, okay, sure, fine. So there's like a reductio ad absurdum approach that some people might take on the techno-optimist side.
Sure.
But if we look at the last, 100, 150 years, it's like, sure, I mean, there are a lot of lifestyle improvements. I mean, like I would not want to live 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago.
Right.
But those are not all directly attributable to technological advances. It's like, do I think it's a good thing that we don't have like 8-year-olds working as chimney sweeps in the US? Yeah. I think that's a good thing. But to tie that directly to some type of technological innovation and attribute all of it to that, I think is disingenuous. So I think the whole leisure class thing,
I don't think it stands.
I don't think it stands.
I would bet on biology and psychology far over technology. And I mean, we are limited by our baser instincts, and men have an instinct to compete. And I'm not saying it's the greatest instinct. I think it causes a lot of destruction when it does. It also causes a lot of innovation and a lot of justice and all these lofty things when it does. But we are wired to compete and we are wired to differentiate. And you see it as, neighbors buy what other neighbors do not, or you try harder to separate yourself in your aesthetic. So like if you go to an American college, there's maybe 5 different types of aesthetics and people just self-classify themselves within them. It's a identifier and a differentiation kind of mechanism. We all take that up. And if you're telling me that we're going to be free 20 hours a day, that's either going to end up in war or some kind of conflict, because you need busyness. I have a mentor. He's a very smart friend. I'll put it like that. He's a very famous entrepreneur back in India. His name is Varun. And Varun said this to me because I had the dream of doing something well, making enough money, and then going somewhere to write a book. And he's like, try doing it. You're going to call me and you're going to say, I was so much better off struggling every day with what you were doing. But the minute you're free for long enough, without an active adventure or an active game, you don't have what orients you to life. And so you must relish the fact that you're busy. Because one day you'll be old and your body would be giving in and you'd miss the time where you had something that occupied you enough to keep you engaged. And it's very difficult to miss the water when you're the fish inside swimming and you don't know it. But he said that's the essence of the struggle up, the maintenance, as well as the climb down. The fun is the busyness, the things that come in your way and make life so real, so vibrant.
So I would agree with that. I agree with that completely. I would probably just use engagement instead of busyness.
Very
right?
interesting.
And then there's the question of what you're being engaged with, right? So if it's just reacting to all the messages and email coming in through the inbox, cell phone, Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, whatever your collection of inboxes is that most people are drowning in, right? You could just be reacting to everyone else's agenda.
Yeah.
That busyness doesn't feel good.
That's a loss condition. That's not
That
a win condition.
really doesn't feel good. For I have not met a single person who's like, I love playing whack-a-mole with everyone else's agenda for my time. So then it's a question of what you're being engaged with, right? And I agree with what Varun said. And I also think that we're going to see amazing quantum leaps forward in so many different areas. So there's a lot of upside to these technological advances. I mean, what I pay most attention, I suppose, on the positive side of things to biosciences and biotech, things like that, medicine. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's hard to even fathom where we're going to be in 2-3 years' time. It's not going to take very long. I mean, you look at what like AlphaFold did for proteins
Right.
in a summer. I mean, it's like what previously would have taken decades upon decades upon decades. It's unbelievable what is going to come. So in terms of, for instance, developing targeted medicines for rare diseases and so on, I mean, I think we are entering the golden age of medicine in many respects.
Is the trajectory tends towards zero disease, or is it tends towards most disease eliminated? Because this is like, this is godly technology when you're able to completely decode how a protein folds and then how it works on specific diseases, design one-for-one vaccines.
Yeah.
Right? Like that kind of stuff is already like, are we moving towards a disease-free reality, you'd say, from the way it looks?
I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
I say that just because, viruses and bacteria evolve too, right? So just like we end up with superbugs and so on, the playing field is constantly changing. But I do think that a lot of conditions that are sort of the equivalent of like the 4 horsemen of death, right? Cancer, et cetera, perhaps, fingers crossed, neurodegenerative disease. But cancer is kind of top of the list in a lot of respects for the type of technological advances that we're talking about. I mean, there's just some incredible stuff coming down the pike. And so, for instance, I'm involved with, am I allowed to say this? We'll have to check this for post purposes, but involved with a company called Lila. I think it's Lila Biosciences, but Lila. And they're basically, as far as I'm aware, the front runner, one of the front runners, and they were just featured in some media about this on a pretty short list of companies for innovation in AI. But they're taking wet labs, so the ability to run experiments, and tying it directly to AI. So the AI are generating the hypotheses and then doing everything necessary independent of humans to run scientific experiments, right? So
That's crazy.
Yeah. So you imagine what can be done, right? If instead of having scientists spending 60, 70% of their time getting on bended knee, writing grants to, in our case in the US, like the NIH, but like most countries have the equivalent of something like that, begging for money. They're only actually doing the work they want to do 30, 40% of the time in some cases. And in order to do that, they have to recruit and then promise that they'll be able to bring this person on and show that they can pay for their time for 2 years, and then they want to recruit certain patients. Now, patient populations is kind of a separate thing. But if you take all of that, if you take a lot of that and you replace it with thousands of experiments being run concurrently by AI, which is able to iterate without human intervention and then provide back results, where do you end up with like drug discovery? Where do you end up with many things beyond drug discovery? It's hard to even begin to imagine just how incredibly valuable that could be to humankind from a medical perspective. And that could be prevention, it could be cure, it could be extension, it could be performance enhancement, who knows, right? There's another company that I'm involved with, which people could check out, called Strand Therapeutics on the cancer side, who are really thinking very intelligently about how to incorporate the sort of AI design piece into developing like an mRNA programmable layer for therapeutics. It's just incredible. And without this technology, like this stuff either doesn't work at all or it's really slow, right? But now like the opportunity to add on booster rockets to accelerate things is just, it's unlike anything that anyone has ever seen. So very excited about that, right? Like I have unabated enthusiasm about that. I mean, we could talk about the flip side, like the dark side of that coin too, right? It's like, well, what happens when people can 3D print viruses and like create bioweapons and like they have ChatGPT locally on their computer and they can like trick it into giving them advice for God knows what, right? And like ghost guns and all that. Like, yeah, I mean, that's coming too. Like, so are we going to see like 1,000 more Luigi Mangionis, right? Maybe, right? Who shot the United Healthcare CEO. Like, I mean, it's, and one of the things that techno-optimists miss, I'm not even sure they miss it, but they don't mention it because typically, again, these are good people, but investors who are biased and they have very, very large holdings in AI companies. As do I, by the way, right? Just in full disclosure, but they're like, well, what about, typically if they're talking like a room full of people who aren't convinced, somebody's like, well, what about the truck driver, right? What about the person who works in a restaurant? And I'm like, yeah, those are viable questions, right? Robotics is coming, right? Like it's here. Like you're in Austin right now. Like this, if you go to downtown, it is Waymo City. Like you'll come to an intersection and it's like Waymo, 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 Waymo.
Yep. Same for San Francisco.
There's
the market sound of San Francisco is the Waymo hum. You can hear it everywhere.
Yeah,
it's the sound of my dreams in San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's coming, right? So those questions are viable, but I think it's like, what do you do? And one of my friends, Chris Sacco, is a phenomenal investor, has talked about this. It's like when you have people who are planning to be lawyers and suddenly they're out of a job, right? Because the law firm has Harvey or whatever, like fill in the blank, right? They've got, and I know a partner who at a large law firm right now is in charge of figuring this out. Like, how do they use AI for as much as humanly possible? And so you've got those people, or you've got people who are planning on becoming, an analyst at wherever, Goldman or McKinsey, but suddenly the social contract is broken, right? In so much as the deal was, unspoken as it may have been, you work hard, you get good grades, you go to a good school, you graduate.
We give you a job.
Yeah, you get this, and then
you
bada
have
bing,
your life.
bada boom, right? You have this job, and you can afford that nice spot in like Soho eventually, and boom, that's gone. What do those people do?
And for the next 5 years,
what
specifically,
do they start? Making crocheted like slippers on Etsy? I don't think all of them do, right?
Right.
And I just don't know. I will agree with the sort of the bull case in the sense that a lot of people are very, very ingenious, right? And necessity is the mother of invention. So people will figure out all sorts of stuff. Like there will be all sorts of new jobs that we can't even imagine within the next few years, for sure, of course. But with the speed of displacement, with the rapidity of improvement of, even in just the case of LLMs, the models,
right?
Will we be able to adapt quickly enough to prevent massive social upheaval? I don't think so. I hope so, right? I really hope so. But I'm skeptical of this very smooth ride where suddenly everybody gets reskilled or laterally skilled, right? I mean, you look at like factory workers in fill in the blank location in
Vietnam.
in the Rust Belt, well, in Vietnam, or we could use a U.S. example, right? People who used to work in large automotive factories, right? Company town, boom, suddenly they're not there. What happens? Did they get reskilled? Like most of those people got jobs. What'd they end up doing? They ended up working at Walmart for like, God knows whatever dollars an hour. Right now, a lot of those people, rightfully so, and I would say in a lot of respects, are pissed off. Okay. a lot of that has, I mean, I think that's one piece of the cocktail for where we are in the U.S. Right? There's vast inequality, and I think that chasm has grown a lot in the last few decades. If AI is an amplifier, right, on an individual level, but also on like a kind of cohort level, I think that those two ends just get pushed further apart.
Right.
That's also true geopolitically, right? It's like which companies can afford the compute and which companies can get the chips and which companies can.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, which countries.
Yeah, I
countries.
figured.
But it's
yeah,
the
right.
same say. Companies, countries, individuals, like it's the haves and the have-nots
Yeah.
in terms of access to these tools as amplifiers.
Completely agreed. As a matter of fact, I think, America is very unique for somebody who's from the outside because you can always bet your money that for every single issue, there's going to be two sides that will be fighting over it.
Yeah.
And so one of the shocks for me was how rife the politics of America is, like how heated up it is. It's not the same back from where I come from. And then I saw that, okay, race is a big issue here and people fight over that, for instance, and understandably so. There's a history there. And now I think what will happen is there's going to be a lot of old versus new conversation or old versus young conversation because a lot of these youngsters, in any which case, feel cheated because, well, land is more expensive. To live your dream life is any which way very difficult. Out in America, you need to get loans to go through college to get to a job that you may not get anymore. But I think for the next 5 to 7 years, there's going to be a disorientation period. And it's already begun. I think if you look up graphs after 22, which is when the first model comes out, freshers right out of college are getting less and less jobs. The unemployment gap is widening. And I think it's just going to continue to happen for at least the next 5 to 7 years before we get our bearings right and we figure out where else does labor get absorbed.
Yeah.
A lot more people are going to be not working. Inflation is going to go up, not just here worldwide, particularly because of the geopolitical crisis, energy crisis, gas prices going up. Everything will get expensive. And I think we'll have conversations about, because if I was a 22-year-old right out of college, like my nephew is, I'd feel cheated.
Yeah.
My father made so much effort to send me to college. He took out a loan he has to repay with his life.
Yeah.
And you're telling me I don't have a job when I'm a very competent software engineer. The one profession you promised would be kind of okay.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I would love to hear from you what you think, since of course you know it infinitely better than I do. What happens in India over the next few years, right?
Very
and I
interesting.
also wonder, while you're talking about the politics, I just don't know this about India, but how many people self-identify as religious? Because I think part of what we see in the U.S. is in depending on how you look at it. I mean, there are many different lenses through which you can look at the U.S., but for at least a period of a few decades, sort of an increased secularization of the U.S. And I think it was David Foster Wallace who wrote Infinite Jest who said at one point, like, we all worship something. Like, the key is knowing what you're worshiping, right? And I think that many people in lieu of religion have, in the U.S., gravitated to kind of team blue or team red.
Or capitalism.
Or capitalism as a religion.
Mm-hmm.
But in India, what do you feel like the effects of AI will be, or how the effects will differ from what we might see in the US?
I'll tell you what comparables exist. So, well, technology has had waves that has come about. This is one of the newer ones and one of the larger ones. No doubt it's a tsunami even, AI. But India is a labor-dependent economy. We have cheaper labor than cheaper automation. So we tend towards using people as opposed to using technology. Mm-hmm. An example I use, the last time I was here, I was in Las Vegas and we called up the reception of a hotel because the room had some issue. And I had a 2-minute, very pleasant conversation, by the way, where I was like, wow, this is super polite. And I was hanging up and Anshir just looks at me, he's like, you realize this was AI, right? Which would never happen in India. I'd have 2 people pick up the phone in India because we just have so many people who want a job. So one, I think that. 2, I think one of the benefits India will have is its English fluency because the lingua franca of the AI world is English. And getting English right means having a lot more leverage with the tool as opposed to without it. And I think that's going to be a benefit. I think we will be the largest data provider to these AI companies because just such a huge amount of usage. I think the applications layer we'll do very well. Foundational models we might struggle with because we're already kind of behind. I think in public health and these kind of things, the AI usage in India would bring far more social good than anything. So if you're able to do eye scans and predict who's going to go blind because of that, or if you're able to come up with some kind of vaccine that prevents a very edge case disease that would otherwise have taken a pharma company billions of dollars of research for like 5,000 people, where it would not have made sense commercially. We'd see a lot of that happening. I do wonder what happens when it starts invading our homes and if nutrition and these kind of things get affected. If my fridge has, like, it just tells me what macros are missing and orders it itself, right? Because we do have the application layer on which you can order food and it'll arrive to your home better than almost any other part of the world. In 10 minutes, I can get whatever food I want. Right? So we have the human layer built out. I think with the smartness layer to appliances, there might be an added benefit in public health overall. For instance, education will get flattened because the quality of education along the edges really decreases. So if I get rural enough in India, the schools can be compared to, what is the word for it? A wrestling ring almost. It gets wild out there. And the education is not quality enough. So the human capital that you produce may not be the best, but I think AI flattens that massively. And so I think some handicaps, some very definite handicaps will be worked over. I am hoping we are able to perform one of the best AI human collab dances, whatever the word might be, tandems in the world, because India as a policy, and this is a compulsion of India's politics, you cannot have a policy framework that does not favor labor in India because there's just so much. You cannot have that kind of civil unrest where 10% or more people are unemployed. And so I am hoping that that sort of working together of man and machine, which is at least unavoidable in the medium term, happens to find a very successful manifestation in India. That's one. The second question you asked was about religious. And it's so interesting because the dominant religion in India is Hinduism. Within the fold of Hindu thought is also religions like Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, which are somewhat cousin religions, and people, depending on people, they might agree or disagree, but largely people would agree they're cousin religions. And they come from a very different school of thought than the Abrahamic religions do, which is your Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. These religions necessarily are not predicated on belief in the same way that Abrahamic religions are. So I may be religious without having too much belief, as long as I perform it and as long as I wear it. And so the gradient for what religious might mean is super different. Where if you ask me, I'm religious, but when was the last time I was praying in a temple? Never. But does that take away from my religiosity? None whatsoever.
In India.
In India, within Hinduism in the fold of such. So I think overall, religious identification might have gone up in India. Has that changed social attitudes massively in politics? I would say so. But is it the same kind of religious politics intermixture that happens in the rest of the world? I don't think so. A lot of people were worried when Prime Minister Modi came into power about 10 years ago that might happen. It's been 11 years and I think the results are out. It's not nearly been as bad as it can get when religion and politics gets involved. And there's a very famous speech from an ex-prime minister or an interview bit about secularism, religion, and this kind of stuff in the political fabric of India. And somebody's asking him, he's like, the forces that you are unleashing to become prime minister, don't you worry that they will take over from your wisdom and cause India to become a very fragmented religious society? To which his response was something to the effect of that secularity or secularism is built into the fabric of Hinduism. And you'd find that over a period of time, and it's actually, we can get into the metaphysics of it, but it's actually very true. And I found that both empirically and intellectually. I'm completely comfortable no matter what religion you are, for whatever means or purposes. You know, it's my wife who's Catholic Christian. I tell her she's more Hindu than Christian, and she can be perfectly fine if her belief structures are the way they are. She can be a Jesus-believing Hindu. It does not intersect. It's not exclusionary whatsoever. And so I think that influences polarization in a different way, as Americans probably have gotten more religious or more secularized and have therefore chosen red or blue. It's weird. You could say that there are parallels between how red and blue operate here and how religious difference operates in India. You can say there are very solid parallels. But America is largely political in that way. and India, you'd find that difference on a social, religious level may not translate the same way on a political level. So there are some comparables. They're not parallel. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Sorry if it was a complicated explanation, but that's how I think India will shape up vis-a-vis AI. I think it's very alive. I think the future of a country's progress is going to be ensured not just with AI, but also energy and weapons in the future. I think it's an unavoidable conversation at this point. If you do not have your own weapons, and if those weapons are not 6th, 7th, 8th generation fighter pilot jets or whatever, or like AI integrated satellites that shoot missiles from the top, you cannot promise social stability to your nation. And with a country like India that's surrounded by, confrontational countries on all sides, it's very important that we solve for that we solve for energy and we solve for AI, because those are the three, I think, amplifiers of the next 20, 30 years in every sense of the word.
How is India doing on the energy front?
Well,
'Cause I know,
surprisingly
you look
good.
at China and like nuclear. I mean, they're so far ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Compared to say the US.
Right.
Unbelievably so.
We just started our civil nuclear. We just announced that the civil nuclear project is up and running. So we will have energy that comes from nuclear now. I think given the current crisis, they've done phenomenally well. We haven't had a single cent of increase in fuel prices through the war, which is fantastic because neighboring countries are all going through blackouts.
Who subsidizes that? How does that work?
No, we have a great relationship with both Iran and Israel,
I see.
and Russia and the US and China. Well, China, no. But India does a great job at foreign policy in a way where it's everybody's friend.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they let our ships pass. Like that's really what happened. But it's still not without challenge.
Yeah, you need some Jedis on your diplomat team to make that work. Yeah.
It's a weird thing where like I used to criticize India for having a very non-aligned foreign policy where we're in nobody's camp, but we're in everybody's camp.
Yeah.
And I thought this is going to bite us back because eventually when war comes coming, you need friends by your side. You know, it's just the nature of the world. You need allies. But surprisingly, when war came coming in the West Asian front, having friends everywhere really helps. You know what I'm saying? And so it's worked out very well in this instance, this non-alignment political sort of doctrine that we've had since the inception of India, as a matter of fact.
I didn't, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah, thanks for the education.
No, I mean, I'm glad
this
I
is
could do
great.
that.
I don't learn anything when I'm talking, so thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes I learn something when I'm talking, and then I'm like, I didn't know I had that thought in my head. Because, you put that out for the first time with words. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How are you using artificial intelligence?
I would say that I'm probably not going to give a super satisfying answer here. I mean, I use...
Will I not be able to clip it?
You probably won't find this a worthwhile clip.
That's how we talk as podcasters.
The 6 things that you need to do now that Tim is using with AI will be very boring. So I apologize if you clicked on the thumbnail with a big red arrow pointing at my head. But the short answer is I really view myself, even though I'm involved with all sorts of technology companies and lived in the Bay Area for almost 20 years and everything else, as a very dull edge technologist. I am maybe closer to the Amish than I am to like somebody,
Sam Altman.
somebody who has, OpenClaw all over their house.
I am a little surprised you'd say that. Because for all the leverage and lifestyle design stuff, maybe you've moved on. And, if I were to listen to some of your more recent stuff, it does seem like you moved on to a more evolved phase in life.
I can answer that. And I probably screwed up and kind of fumbled the ball earlier. Here's my position, is that if you feel like you don't have enough time and you need AI tools to do things better and faster than the next person, you have not determined your zone of genius or your informational advantage, if you have one, but you have not figured out an attractive enough target. And you should spend more time thinking about that. So maybe that's how you use an AI tool, is you do an in-depth personality assessment. You take like Big Five and this and Enneagram, and like you do all of that through an intake that takes you an hour or two. And you use that to identify where you actually have some type of Venn diagram with these various components I mentioned to determine where you point your energy. And if you do that, I don't think you need to spend a lot of cycles trying to beat the next person, because if you've done that, you're already opting into a red ocean of some type instead of a blue ocean. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I would much rather ask myself, what is something that I can do that I enjoy doing? So I'm going to have more endurance than the next person because I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
That maybe I'm not even A+ at, but I have some proclivity for. Maybe I find something easier to do than other people. So again, I'm going to have a huge endurance advantage where I could ideally create a position for myself that is a category of one in some respect, right? And there's a very old book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And there's one chapter called The Law of Category. It's like 5 pages long that I think is worth reading. And then there's The Blue Ocean Strategy is the book. But if you've done all that, I don't need AI to make me faster. I don't need AI.
So you're old school. You're saying if you figure out your personal area of genius and then you add to that obsessive working, you'll do enough reps, it'll earn you enough experience, it'll get you enough compounding benefits where maybe AI is just flavoring on top at best. Like it helps you research faster.
So AI is an accelerant. So if you're pointed in the right direction, I think it can be helpful, right? But you don't want to put the cart before the horse, right? So the question is like, are you even pointed in a good direction? And you can figure that also not just by navel gazing and doing a lot of personality tests, but experimenting, right? And then at that point, maybe you add AI, right? Just like, for instance, I mean, way back, and I owe him a huge debt of gratitude. One of the first people who was quoted in a piece in the New York Times related to the 4-hour work week, this was probably 2007, 2008, was someone you would never guess in a million years, Mark Andreessen.
Huh.
And
For retard maxing.
yeah, and Mark Andreessen, brilliant guy. I mean, I could go on for hours about how smart this guy is and how technically savvy, what a good operator, incredible investor. I mean, what they've done building A16Z is completely bananas. They forced everybody to change how they play that game, right? In the venture capital world. And he had some very nice things to say about the 4-hour work week. But the reason I'm bringing that up is Mark has absolutely zero interest in a 4-hour work week, right? But what he wants to do is make the most of each hour. He wants to get the most leverage and output he can from every hour. Okay, so far so good. So when I've had conversations with people, say about the 4-hour work week, because understandably, and hey, it was done on purpose, I get it, but people get hung up on the title, right? And they're like, well, what if I love what I'm doing? I'm like, yeah, rock on. Work as much as you want. Like if you're pointed in the right direction, I have no problem with hours if you treat hours as fuel/accelerant.
Sure.
Right? It's propellant that pushes you in your direction, but you better fucking make sure, pardon my French, that you're pointed in the right direction.
Right.
Because it's sometimes not a cheap and easy Control-Z to undo if you spend a year going in the wrong direction, or 2 years or 10 years. So I feel very similarly about AI. Whether it's working 80 hours a week on something or using AI tools, I'm like, great. Assuming you have done the hard thinking up front, which by the way, you could use AI for, right? But if you're using it on the execution side, you really, I think, are best served by figuring out where you can differentiate yourself, increase the likelihood of some durable advantage. And those words are chosen very carefully. Durable advantage, right? Because if you're playing a game that everyone else is playing, you're trying to vibe code the next fill in the blank that 100,000 people are also doing simultaneously, and your goal is to come out first. I don't think it's durable, right?
So clarity is a big one, right? Knowing the direction you're going in is a big one. That has to happen.
Yeah, if and I'm borrowing from Peter Drucker here, I'll give him another shout out. I mean, that guy he's such a clear thinker. The Effective Executive. I mean, even if you have no interest in building a business, it's a fantastic book. And I think it's in that book that he talks about, paraphrasing, but effectiveness is doing the right things and efficiency is doing those things well, right? But doing something well doesn't make it important. So figuring out the what before you fixate on the how, I think is really, 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 really important.
Got it.
So it just makes everything easier. And then if it's easier, you need less accelerant, right?
Yeah. Tell me if I remember incorrectly, but didn't you have like a lot of notebooks that you'd use to record all your eating habits back in college or something like this? That's a story about that.
Yeah, my workouts. Yeah, I had
Right.
like every workout from age, I don't know, 18 to like 35 or something.
And this was the beginning of you beginning to track like metrics in your body and stuff like that,
Oh,
and
yeah,
experimentation with health.
Yeah.
Do you think that you at that age would have answered the question of how to use AI differently in that? Because that guy had a clear direction, I'm assuming somewhat, is that I want to get healthier, I want to feel better. And in a limited game like that, do you not think having some speed, some efficiency using
Oh, sure.
Yeah, right?
Super helpful. Yeah.
Super helpful.
Yeah. If again, if you don't have to be crystal clear, but if you're somewhat clear on a placeholder objective that you have thought through, sure, you can change that, right? I think there's absolutely, Mike. I mean, look, I use AI dozens of times a day. Typically that's in the form of LLMs, right? But I have an employee who's part of his charter is to keep up to speed with these tools. So we use Claude Code and other things internally for simplifying processes, for handling IOs, for podcast sponsors. Like we're using all these tools every day.
Right.
Not all the tools, but a lot of the tools. And in the case of something like performance enhancement, health, oh my God. I mean, it's unbelievable what you can do with these things, right? I mean, I have friends who have just dumped their entire genomes into ChatGPT or something else. And then they'll be like, okay, like I'll download a CSV file of my Oura Ring data, and then I'll download whatever PDF that my doctor sent me of my blood work. And I'm just going to drop it all in and be like, give me some insight, right? Tell me what you think I should be aware of in terms of things that make me unique. And like any trend lines I should be aware of. And I'm butchering the query, right? It would be, it would be much clearer than that. But every friend who has done that has found something non-trivial that they should pay attention to. It could be a drug interaction. Maybe they're a fast metabolizer of something, drug sensitivity, I should say. They have found something that all of their doctors have missed. And these are people also, in some cases, who have access to the most expensive, most elite doctors you can buy or pay. And buy sounds strange, but like pay for.
Yeah, right. Sure. So like health optimization's probably a huge
and that's available to whoever can afford to get their genome sequenced, right? And that's just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper by the day. And we're going to see that with everything, right? You look back to when Craig Ventnor sequenced his genome. How much did that cost? Like, I don't know, like hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it was a lot of money. I'm getting the number wrong, but it was an unbelievable sum of money. But then as Illumina came out and then the hardware gets more and more used, therefore it gets, with economies of scale, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, just like with everything else. Like Gordon Gekko cell phone back in the day on Wall Street versus like an Android phone that somebody's using in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Same idea. It's all going to get cheaper. And like that's something that's going to be within reach of, I hesitate to say most people because I recognize like, if you're in like the bottom 10% in the US income wise, you're probably still in the global top 1% or 5% or something like that. But it's remarkable what you can come away with in terms of insights just by dropping it into an LLM and literally giving it 5 minutes or less to just chew on it all. I don't think anyone could have imagined this 5 years ago. I mean, with any specificity.
Right, sure.
Maybe in some science fiction novel where it's like, there's a black box and then hand wave, some things happen and then it spits out this piece of paper. You're like, okay, fine. Yeah, that existed. But it's very, very exciting. When it comes to like physical training and performance and diet and stuff, yeah, I mean, I think that's going to probably change less than people might expect. Like it's going to improve step by step. Like I haven't seen it yet. I've seen attempts like through the app made by Dexcom, which does continuous glucose monitors where you can like take a photograph of something, but it's like take a photograph of your plate of food with chicken. And it's like chicken and assorted other food. And you're like, yeah, it's not helpful. Like I should be able to, maybe they ship something like the size of a quarter, or you put your hand in there and it's like okay, there's an onboarding process that measures your hand and therefore it can approximate. It's
How
like,
much
yeah,
is what?
this seems like
Right.
200 calories of X and 24 calories of, or 24 grams of protein, et cetera. Like, I'm shocked that I have not seen this yet, because who the hell wants to type in their food log? Nobody.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, we'll get a better idea of that stuff, but
You know how with nutrition and physical exercise, there is always, well, one, there are always trends. So I think now it's high rocks. 10 years ago it was CrossFit. You know, these keep coming.
Yeah.
And then even within, say, standard weightlifting, there are variables such as how many reps do you want to do? Do you want to do a 1 rep max, or do you want to do 15 reps? Or what is the ideal rep size? With nutrition, there is trend lines like keto or
Paleo,
carnivore,
or whatever,
right?
yeah.
And then there is a standard, which is the calorie in, calorie out macros model. But even with that, there are so many debates, there's so many nuanced debates. I remember thinking to myself as a more sort of like fairly young guy about nutrition. I was like, it seems like there is no clear answer, and what you want to optimize for is what your body feels best with, and maybe move from there, right? Because if I listen to enough podcasts, I would inherit enough confusion about what the right eating situation is.
Yeah.
You think questions like this, which are somewhat open-ended, will have a more definite answer with enough data?
no.
No? You think it'd still be open-ended in that way?
Well, if we're talking about models, right? I mean, most of them are just slicing and dicing the internet in different ways.
Yeah.
And like, sure, there are some with proprietary data sources like Lila, as I mentioned, right? Because they've got like the wet labs and the automation and so on, which is already producing results. It's like, this isn't 10 years in the future. It's pretty wild. The point I'm trying to make is that if we assume for the moment that we would like to have large randomized controlled trials with like sham or like the whole 9 yards that you would want in like a peer reviewed publication in a fancy journal for nutrition, like you could wait until you're already rolling over in your grave. Like it's these are almost all going to be observational studies. Yeah, we can do like a 14-day thing in mice and like, okay, but we're not just big giant versions of furry rodents.
Right.
So where I think AI is more interesting there, and I hope I'm proven wrong, right? But I think human bodies, by and large, I mean, look, the genome stuff is interesting, right? So you could spot certain things. Like I'm a cholesterol hyperabsorber, right? That's you can't deduce that unless you have some reasonably sophisticated lipid panel analysis, right? It's not just like high cholesterol, low cholesterol. Like when you figure out that in my case, right, I'm a cholesterol hyperabsorber, that means that more so than most people, dietary intake of say saturated fats, I'm disproportionately predisposed to having my lipids go wonky. Okay. Well, knowing that, that can inform my choice of drug, right? If I'm going to take a drug, which in my case is actually necessary. It's like
a statin, you mean? You can inform
I don't take a statin. In this case, it's ezetimibe. Obviously, talk to your doctor. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving medical advice. But it turns out that I can use this drug that has been studied for a very long time. The side effect profile is very well understood to the extent that we can understand anything. And I just happen to be a hyper responder to that drug. Great news.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But if I had gone to your off-the-shelf regular GP and had just a standard set of labs done, probably given the constraints on them, like 11 minutes per patient or whatever in the US, they'd be like, yeah, okay, look, here's a statin, here's this, here's that. Like, my job is to keep you from dying and I don't have a lot of time, so here you go. Right? But a lot of those may come with off-target effects and side effects and stuff. Okay, but to come back to your question, right? Let's talk about like the more nebulous world of like exercise and nutrition.
Right.
Where I think AI is more interesting to me and where I hope it gets easier is more along the lines of that refrigerator scanning auto ordering, right? It's because right now I could say, for instance, I've done plenty of keto, but
have you enjoyed it?
There's a problem. No, I find it incredibly boring.
There's a problem.
Yeah, right. But let's just say keto, and we'll run with the keto example because I think it might be helpful. Even though I just said I'm a cholesterol hyperabsorber, right? So there's an issue. There's like
contradiction. Yeah,
there's a conflict there. But let's just say a lot of people, for whether it's health reasons, like they might have type 2 diabetes or they're pre-diabetic, or they might have something like epilepsy, or they might have psychiatric disorders, like something called metabolic psychiatry, which is really predominantly focused on ketogenic therapy, nutritional ketosis. People can look up Chris Palmer at Harvard for more on this. The results they get with people with bipolar and schizophrenia are seem almost too good to be true. It's wild. So there's a lot of interest in keto, and the compliance rate is terrible, right? The ability for most people to stick with it is absolutely abysmal because number one, it sounds like it's going to be great to have bacon and cheeseburgers every day, until you realize you can't have anything crunchy, you can't have juice, you can't have condiments, by and large, right? No ketchup allowed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And after a week, you're like, I feel like a human cheesecloth, I quit, right? A lot of that is because your meal, you have a hard time figuring out what you can eat while making it interesting. I think AI will solve that problem, right? It's like, come up with a bunch of variety. I would love to have some stuff that's crunchy and not pork rinds, please. And I want to have as much green as I can, as much vegetables as I can without knocking myself out of ketosis. By the way, here are all my blood labs and my oral glucose tolerance test results and all that. So maybe you can figure it out. And then I want you to make sure this stuff arrives to my house so that I have a week's worth of food.
Yeah.
At the beginning of every week, I stick it in my freezer. All I have to do is stick it in the microwave, right? So it's kind of AI meets something along the lines of like a WeChat in China, right? Which is like your one-stop shopping for everything. So if I were to say where I'm most excited, because I went to the first quantified self meetup ever at Kevin Kelly's house with like 12 people. This is back in 2008 or something. And it's been exciting and horrifying to watch a lot of the biohacking stuff unfold. But in equal measure.
Yeah.
My interest is frequently on behavioral change, right? It's like, it's not enough to have the instructions for AI to say, this is the best diet for you. It's still going to fail 90% of the time. It's like, how do you actually get people to do it? You remove, in part, a bunch of the friction, right? It's like, so the idea of me being able to like take photos of my meals, that's it. That's all the work I do. And then at the end of the week or the end of the day or whatever, probably end of the week, they're like, all right, you're hitting your goals if you're eating out, right? If you're eating at home, it's like food's there.
Right.
You don't have to think about it.
Right.
And just removing all of that friction. Also for accountability, right? Having the equivalent of like an AI life coach. So it's like her in the movie, but instead of being like a romantic partner, it's just someone who's going to like bust your balls and actually keep you going to the gym because they're like, you said you really wanted to do this and you agreed in advance I could create some incentives. So it's like, you've missed 3 days of the gym. If you don't go in again this week, right, I'm going to give $100 out of your bank account that you gave me access to like this political candidate that you hate because we agreed that I like within a certain spectrum of things I could create incentives for you. And then you're like, oh, or it's like, I'm going to send a text message to your 10 friends who you told you would do this and tell them that you're shitting the bed and not doing your homework. Right? Like AI starts to get technology broadly speaking, but AI is going to be sort of the propellant for it. That stuff's interesting to me.
You must, however, at that level of invasion into my private life, and I'll give you a few examples. I lost a little faith with LLMs because when I first started flirting with the idea, I believed it a little too much and I followed it for word. And it wasn't like it was wrong, but I found with enough pressure, it would just change its track. And that was like a human hurt for me, right? Because the trust is so unquantifiable and what it's made up of is so tricky. One of the most common sort of fatigue points that people have in engaging with Chat GPT in specific, but AI in general, is the sycophancy. Initially, they're floored by it. My mother famously said, and famously because I've quoted her so many times, she's like, why do I need to talk to you now? This talks to me so much better, right? There's no conflict. But I'm sure by the time it's like day 30 for her, she'd be like, why is there no conflict? Yeah. Why is it so nice to me? How do I trust what it's telling me? Yeah. And so I've kind of had that. But, and I've actually thought of some very interesting things to do with it. I think the most common use case, whether people like this or not, is self-regulation. People use this for uncertainty management, which is when it's when it's taken into the medical or the medical adjacent context or a diagnostic context, it's called therapy. So people are doing at-home therapy, which may or may not be very good. But what I do find it does very well, one is idea generation. The other thing is it simplifies what I'm thinking and what I'm ignoring when I make a statement. And so conflict management's great. Like if you pull up a common screen and have a conflict be mediated through that from a distance when you're just speaking to it and it's putting your message across to the other person in a way that's not inflammatory and vice versa.
I just used that today and yesterday.
It's kind of crazy how good that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use WhisperFlow. Love the product. So I'll like use that. I'll just walk and talk, capture that in a note, and then take that and drop it into Claude typically, and then ask it to edit and recompose it as if they were person X, right? So that could be like a relationship therapist named Terry Real. It could be somebody who wrote a book like The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. It could be Pema Chodron, whoever you want, right?
Could be Carl Jung.
Yeah.
Could be Freud.
Yeah.
Right.
Rewrite it in that style. And then pretty quickly, number one, you get it out of your head so it's not bothering you.
Right.
And then number two, it's incredibly effective. It is unbelievably effective.
But what I mean is that at this scale, it's also novel and so interesting and so useful. But social media, or let's take Twitter in specific. Twitter back in 2008 was this place where I can listen to what Tim's thinking today. Yeah. But in 2026, you're not posting anymore because it's become a dumpster fire. And so things scale very differently.
Yeah,
and the way this might scale.
Not the nicest neighborhood.
Right, exactly. The way this might scale, we might find that we do not necessarily understand the psychosocial, mental health consequences of this whatsoever.
Oh, I think it's going to be bad. I mean, which is why I'm also investing in, I mean, there's the foundation, which does a lot of nonprofit support of science related to mental health therapeutics. And then also on the for-profit side, I mean, I wish it weren't the case, but I mean, mental disorders and psychiatric issues it's going to be a fucking mess. Pardon. And yeah, sorry for the cursing from Long Island. It's hard to undo. So I think it's messy. I do think there might be two silver linings to some of the noise around AI. One is that, I think that we might hit a flashpoint where people en masse, it's like they wake up and have this realization that I think I'm spending 80% of my time interacting with bots on social media.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good one.
And then maybe that's the thing that finally gets people to get off these apps and realize, oh my God, there's this thing called the sun, and like, oh, it turns out like not everyone's an asshole.
Right.
I mean, look, these tools are so effective at hijacking your attention. I would like to think I have a lot of discipline and so on. I have not had social media apps on my phone for 3 or 4 years.
Probably why you're successful.
I will not win. You're not going to win that. I mean, go hang out with all the data scientists and like PhDs and so on, whose sole job is to hijack your attention. Like you're not going to beat them.
Right.
So one of the silver linings is that maybe
we get fed up.
Social media will become almost indefensible to make an argument for why it's good for you to be on these platforms. People are going to have a void to fill then, just like they would if they had like the company and tried to retire and so on, right? So that's not a trivial thing, but net, I think it's like take 2 weeks from social media. Like unless you're a world leader making policy changes, chances are you do not need any of these for 2 weeks. And if you can't take a break, you're a heroin addict. Like, let's call a spade a spade. The other silver lining is that, and I'm sure there are many, it's more than a silver lining, is that maybe, at least within the US, the sheer energy requirements of AI will drive, and I think we're already seeing some of this, but the catalyzing of more nuclear power, and that could come in the form of like reactors that were approved long ago, reactor designs in terms of fission. It could come in the form of fusion. I mean, the hyperscalers are all talking to fusion companies. So in addition to everything else. So that actually could be a net positive. Now, does it actually eke out an advantage for everybody else outside of these massive data centers? I don't know. Maybe they just consume all the energy that these things can create. I don't know. So we'll see. But I think those are two additional,
two very thin silver linings, I see.
If more of the world got off of social media, I
That's
think
actually
the
a big one.
likelihood of us like going to our neighbor's house with a freaking machete goes down pretty tremendously.
Brother, I think, and it's not like I'm saying something that no one said before, but I think specifically for America and specifically about mental health, a lot of mental health crisis will go away when people are not constantly informed about other people doing other things.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a reference point problem. You have too many. And like, I know enough people my age, 30, fairly successful, who will have crippling anxiety about their place in life because they're on social media. I know a fair amount of very beautiful women that no matter how, like, they don't think about how beautiful they are. They're okay with, like, that's not an active attribute they have for themselves, but they'll be put in comparison when they see some runway model looking woman on social media. And what I'm trying to say is that these comparisons are not psychologically, they're not overt. Sometimes they're under the radar. You don't realize you've meditated enough. You understand that there is so much of the cognitions happening under the iceberg, under the or the lower part. Yeah, under the water. And so much of this accumulates because there's so much of it happening with each scroll that your mind's poisoned by the end of the day.
Yeah, it's true. And I will say, I have done a fair amount of meditating. I will say, look, and I don't think I'm exaggerating here. It's like you can use social media and drink more than 1 cup of coffee a day and meditate twice a day for 20 minutes or more, and you end up somewhere. Or you can just have 1 cup of coffee a day, not use social media, don't do any meditating, and you'll end up in the same place. It's just like, you don't necessarily have to add a bunch of new things to your plate. And I recognize why people are maybe averse to doing that because they feel like they already have too much. It's like, no, just subtract a few things for for 2 weeks. I have a friend, really accomplished, brilliant friend who got off of Twitter because he said he was getting dragged into a cesspool and he was using it really, really constantly. Very successful guy. And he got off and it's like the nature of his texts changed. He was happier, lower anxiety, spending more time with his family. He was already a good father and a husband, but it's just like everything got better.
Yeah.
And then he was off for at least a year. And then a few months ago in a group chat with a few other friends, he started sending links to things on X. And I was like, uh-oh.
You're back.
You got dragged into the mud. And he's like, oh, my life is so much worse, but I can't get off. And I'm like, oh, man. And this is somebody with an incredible amount of discipline. Right? He's a world beater. Like this guy is, and he's defenseless, It's like, yeah, just it's like, sure. I mean, you could use like meth and crack and heroin and try to figure out all the behaviors you need to add to offset that, or you can just try to stop using those things.
Right.
I view them as very similar.
You ever feel like the biohacking project evolved into or got rebranded into the longevity project?
I think in my mind they're somewhat separate, and there are a lot of subcategories.
Right.
So you've got the bodybuilding crowd, you've got the performance enhancement crowd, explicitly for sports performance. Mm-hmm. And I actually like those two, even though they make decisions I wouldn't, because their goals are very clear, right? I like that.
Right.
And even as far back as the 4-Hour Body, which came out in 2010, I was like, yeah, a lot of this starts with like racehorses and then patients with wasting diseases, like people with AIDS, let's just say. And then it hops to bodybuilders, and then it hops to like billionaires. And then there's like a slow ramp on for the rest of society if things continue to get interesting and data continue to mount. That sequence may have changed a little bit, but not that much. Actually, I take it back. Right now it has changed completely in the respect that because biohacking has become performative,
Right, sure.
and there's this sort of online, and this is gender neutral, but like measuring contest about who's on the cutting edge doing what, that there are millions of more people now taking the risks that I would have in 2010 only associated with professional bodybuilders, people with racehorses, or somebody with a crippling wasting disease.
Like, for instance?
I mean, questionable gene therapies in, out of not just out of the country, but like out of the first world. I would say, injecting whatever the peptide du jour happens to be, right? Because they want to live stream it and then give a report on what happened.
Right.
It could be anything and everything. The longevity piece I view as related, but the genesis of a lot of it being slightly different, right? Because longevity is not that sexy online.
You don't think so? Biohacking sexier?
Well, biohacking, doing something where you can show an immediate effect,
Sure,
is more interesting for theatrical purposes.
Right.
Than let's wait until I die and we'll see how much things helped. Right?
Right.
That's not a very
Right.
exciting movie to watch.
Right. It's too long.
Yeah, it's
30 seconds or less,
It's way,
please.
way too long.
Right.
But the longevity piece, I mean, a lot of that is coming out of, it's not limited to, but this comes out of, I think, where I saw a lot of the most aggressive pursuit of that coming, not surprisingly, was from people who have billions of dollars after lots of success in tech or otherwise.
Right.
I think people from technology have gravitated towards longevity as hopefully an engineering problem to be solved.
Right.
Going founder mode and figuring out the underlying X, Y, and Z. So
I'm fascinated by that.
So they can pull a lever and make something else happen. Right. Unconstrained by the shackles of
Society.
sort of conventional medicine and so on.
Biology and all that. Yeah.
And I'm glad they're doing it. Right. I mean, I think that some of it is very interesting. Most of it I would not touch with a 10-foot pole. But am I glad that, Peter Thiel's doing what he's doing? Great. Like, you don't hear about all of it, but like, I'm glad there are people like that pushing the frontier. Am I glad that, Brian Johnson's tracking and measuring and reporting? Like, I think there's probably a lot of good that comes out of that. And I think there's a lot of good that comes out of that. I think there are probably some side effects too. But the longevity piece, I mean, a lot of the folks I know in Silicon Valley who are serious, who I consider serious about it, are funding a lot of research and or forming for-profit companies. Like, they're forming companies intended to solve certain biological problems. And I'm structure agnostic, right? I think oftentimes you need both, right? You do need credible scientists doing good work. And then maybe that's sponsored research and there's a for-profit company that has right of first refusal with IP or something. It's like, okay, I'm structure agnostic. But the people who I view as really serious about it are doing most of it behind the scenes.
They're not performing in the theater. Is that what you mean by behind the scenes?
No, they tend to be separate.
Cool.
The people who are supporting the science and like building those companies for like credible, defensible research tend to be separate from the folks who are in front of the camera. Brian is a very smart guy. I mean, I interviewed him before he became the current iteration. I remember because I asked him as a sound check, what do you have for breakfast? And I think it was like an omelet with eggs or something, or it was an omelet with cheese and some other stuff. So, times have changed. But Brian's a really smart guy. So it's like, I hope that he comes across things, and certainly he's noticing things as an N of one that are interesting, right? So if those then spark research where we can determine if it was an anomaly in time or if it's replicable or if it applies to other people, like, I do think that's interesting.
I think any data that comes out of it will be
But I mean, will people of my generation live to be 150? I would bet against it. I think it's unlikely. I mean, every generation we've had something that seemed to promise the fountain of youth. So far, we've always been wrong.
Right. The closest we've come is anti-diabetes medicine, right? Rapamycin, metformin.
I mean, antibiotics help to not die when you're
Sure.
younger too. Rapamycin is pretty interesting. I think that's on a short list of interesting things. But there's a lot you can do without taking pills and potions, right? I mean, you want to make sure you don't have basic deficiencies, but I think intermittent fasting and weight training and like some zone 2 here and there and some VO2 max training, like I think it's like the fundamentals work because fundamentals work. And
so this is the 2080. If somebody manages to do that, that's the 2080 in this.
I mean, I can kind of do whatever I want, right? I mean, I have access to if I want to take the latest and greatest, God knows what acronym and number peptide, like I can get it.
Right.
I'm not. I mean, I used things like BPC 157 like 15 years ago. I mean, I'm aware of these things, but biology is really sensitive, and a lot of the people who are pulling levers, and I made this mistake myself, underestimate just how many feedback loops and complexity there is in the system and how much damage you can do if you're not careful, right? Like people DIYing brain stimulation. Oh my God, like you can really mess yourself up. So I do think certain things are best left to professionals who spend all their time thinking about these things. I wrote a long blog post about the title is No Biological Free Lunches. Right. And it's a guideline, right? It's not an absolute truth. Some things are riskier than others, but it's like if there's a large effect, just assume there are side effects of equal magnitude or at least non-trivial side effects. And if you don't know what they are, that is a problem. So I prefer to know what the side effects are or the secondary effects. So if you said to me, hey, we met up 6 months from now and you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm like, minus the German part, right? Or Austrian, pardon me. Then, but it's like, oh my God, you put on 30 pounds of muscle and you got a 15 pack or whatever because you're so ripped. And you said it was because I used this gene therapy and forget about gene therapy. I used this peptide because it increases HGH, human growth hormone, or IGF-1 or whatever. I used this peptide because it increases testosterone. I'd be like, cool. Maybe I'll try that, but I will just inject human growth hormone and testosterone
right.
because we've been following those for
30, 40 years now.
Oh, yeah, 100 plus years.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. And so I would prefer to know exactly what I'm signing up for.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the peptides are inherently riskier than those.
Right.
I just don't know. And I'm not sure anyone knows what that looks like.
And I'm not sure the sources are verified.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of
that
contamination
too.
And adulteration and that kind of risk.
Yeah. And people can read or listen to podcasts comparing kind of brand name versus generic. It's like you really, even at a pharmacy right down the road here in Austin, Texas, like, an apple is not an apple. It's not an apple. Like there are huge differences in some instances in the composition and contamination of name brand versus generic. Not always, but I'm just saying it's like, that is not even getting into the world of like supplements or unregulated categories of things. Right. So,
by and large, do you think BPC 157 is a reliable one?
No idea.
No idea?
I mean, there's, a lot of the most interesting data that has come about that people are talking about is like, a bunch of mice have their MCL or whatever severed. I'm making that up, but like, and then
it's
and then they're drinking BPC 157 in their drinking water, and holy shit, there's this miraculous recovery or reattachment, et cetera. I have no idea, and for that reason, it's a no.
Right.
Right.
But you have experimented personally?
I experimented long ago. It didn't do anything for me.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And there are cases. Turned out I had torn extensors in my right elbow, and they needed good old fashioned surgical repair. They needed somebody to go in there like a carpenter and fix it. And I recognized, look, I avoided that for 20 years, so I understand people who are hesitant to consider that stuff. But like science is not a fad. It's not something that only liberals pay attention to.
It's so
It wasn't.
funny.
It's like fucking.
Dude,
it's
that's so funny.
terrifying and sad. And look, I know there are people, I know conservatives who support a lot of science who don't get into that mud wrestling match.
Right.
But it's like, we need a way to not fool ourselves. And so far, one of the best ways we've figured out to do that is with something called the scientific method, right? With appropriate blinding and all of that stuff. So it's really important. It's slow. It drives me crazy. I've funded a lot of research, and it's maddening how long it takes, which is part of why like the private company route is interesting. I don't think that the private companies are automatically better. There are some perverse incentives and like weird things.
But they're faster.
They're faster. They don't always end up with the best interest of the end user at heart.
Right.
Right. I can give plenty of examples of that in recent years, but EpiPen would be one example. In any case, I'll put that aside. So
yeah,
I do think that my interest, I have a very barbell approach to how I look at things like longevity, which I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, frankly. I mean, I do try. I'm trying to optimize my health span, which automatically informs longevity, but they're not exactly the same thing. Like, for all I know, if I look back at my family tree, it's like every male on either side, the upper max is like 85. And if you account for antibiotics and infant mortality and stuff, it's not like we've been going from living 80 years to 90 to 100 to 120. That hasn't actually happened, right? So it seems like I actually like basing my decisions on the assumption that I will die at 85. But I want to increase my functional runway as close to that end as possible.
So you're healthy for longer.
Yeah.
That's what that means, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm looking at things that are very new, right? So, for instance, I ended up investing in a startup that is hopefully going to inject a startup that is going to develop an injectable version of something called Klotho, which could be very interesting for neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's and so on. That's a ways out, right? Biotech takes a while, right? It's like, even if you have all the AI toys in the world, right? As it stands right now, there's still regulatory processes.
Right.
And even though it's frustrating, I don't want to go back to the Wild West where people are just selling peptides out of a wagon they're driving from town to town, right? Like, I'm cool with not doing that. People can look up thalidomide, right? It's like, FDA is actually super important. There are equivalent versions everywhere. But I'm looking at stuff that's new, and then I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I'm not going to be one of the first 100 monkeys shot into space. No, thank you. But I'll watch it very carefully, and then I'm going to invest and fund research. Sometimes that's the same thing. And then I'm going to look at stuff that's really, 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 really old, right? I would say most interesting of that to me is probably multiple variants of fasting.
It's so funny.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, what do animals do if they're sick or wounded? They fast. Every single mammal that I'm aware of. Which is different from extended caloric restriction.
Right.
Not a fan of that. Coming back to the health span piece, right? But like today, been fasting all day. I don't know what time it is. It's like 5 o'clock, right? 5:30. I had one coffee and a little bit of exogenous ketones, like supplemental ketones before coming here. Like, that's it. Lots of water, some electrolytes. And I do think there is a lot to be said for that. Dominic D'Agostino is someone people can look up. Mark Mattson, also a very, very good scientist who's done incredible work on intermittent fasting. But, and this is my, right, understanding my personal profile, like genomics and labs and everything else. Well, if I don't want to eat cheese and hamburgers all day on the ketogenic diet, right, which is like, well, might kind of win the battle and lose the war in the sense of like, I want to keep my heart working.
Right.
You can still, through intermittent fasting or say 3-day fasts or fast mimicking diets also, like 3 days a month in my case, end up upgrading your metabolic machinery for producing ketones, right? So it's like I'm producing plenty of ketones right now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to have this conversation because there's not enough glucose.
So you are in ketosis right now?
Well, in ketosis requires sort of a reference point, right?
Right.
So what I would say, having done lots of finger pricks and having worn the CGMs and continuous ketone monitors also, although I don't find them super reliable for reasons I could explain, I'm probably at like 0.6 millimolars of ketones.
But that's not a lot if I remember correctly.
It's not a lot, but I know the difference. And it's like enough, maybe it's 0.7.
Okay.
It's plenty for me to run my brain on ketones.
Got it.
And what I'm measuring with a finger prick is something called BHB.
Right. Beta hydroxybutyrate?
Yeah, beta hydroxybutyrate. Yep. So that is, and there are different forms of BHB. So it's like before I came here, I took a L-BHB ester as an example. So it's like, sort of a kind of connoisseur of ketones in the same way some people are with wine, I guess. Not all ketones are equal. The most common supplements are, I think, almost definitively very bad for your liver. So I would warn people. I think it's way too early to start using a lot of ketone supplements. Way too early.
You mean the exogenous ketone supplements?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. If it contains something called 1,3-butanediol, which most of them do, I would stay on the safe side and steer away from that. Another example of dull edge, right? Because a lot of people have been chugging this stuff like energy drinks.
Yeah. Well, I've been on BHB before. I'm sure there was whatever you're mentioning.
Yeah, the 1,3-butanediol. It's pretty cheap to produce. It's there are a lot of reasons to be careful around it, but the reason I bring it up is that if you're fasting for at least 16 hours and you deplete your liver of glycogen, I'm borrowing all this from Mark Mattson's conversations. What does your body do? Your body starts to generate more ketone bodies, and it's kind of like practicing a language or something. It's like the more frequently you're practicing that language of producing ketones, the better your body gets at it. Right. The more it retains that ability. And I could keep going, but it's kind of like, look, what kills people in your family? And I'm borrowing from other people as well, like Peter Attia, who has the book Outlive, which I think is one of the better books on the topic, frankly. But it's like, what kills people in your family? Is it cancer? Is it neurodegenerative disease? Although usually the causes of death are kind of secondary or a consequence or related to that. Is it, some type of cardiovascular stuff, right? Stroke, heart attack, et cetera? Is it something else? There's a pretty short list of kind of the handful of things that kill most people. Right. And it's like, okay, well, let's try to mitigate the risk of those things individually without completely sacrificing your quality of life. And then, like, what do you want to do besides sit in front of a computer, right? You want to rock climb? Like, you want to be able to pick your grandkids up, right? You want to be able to, whatever it might be, like still go hiking with your friends on pretty intense, like mountain hikes or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you can kind of plan for that and then work backwards from what you want to be able to do, given age-related declines in strength and muscle mass and so on. Right. You can figure out where you need to be now. This is also true of VO2 max, because then with the natural decline, it's like, where do you end up if you try to project out based on available data when you're 60, 70, 80? Okay. And you can back into it, as incomplete as it might be. You can start to figure out how you should train now and do that, right? The vast majority of, there are some people who are, they very rarely self-describe as biohackers, but certainly anyone who is like let's just say a CEO, and actually I'll give you an example, like Sami Inkinen, Finnish name, I'm sure I'm butchering it, but he runs something called Virtu Health, VIRTU, knows more about the ketogenic diet than most people. I think he rode across the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean in ketosis. Very high level endurance athlete. Also just killer startup operator. It's like, okay, I don't think he would ever call himself a biohacker.
Yeah.
But
That's not his primary identity.
but I would say that's who you want to talk to,
Right.
right?
Very interesting.
It's not someone who's coming up with a list of like what they want to do to get more clicks on their TikTok videos or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
and
assuming-
somebody I again, I mean, it's kind of for me, it's just my personal preference too, but it's like also somebody who's funding research, whether that's through or gathering data. By the way, it's like doesn't have to be in white lab coats and
Sure.
in a university.
Yeah.
There are lots of really great ways to gather valuable data. Like if you're Aura or Whoop or it's like, oh my God. And you see this. I opened my Aura app today and it was like, would you want to be willing to share your data so we can study hypertension? It's like great use of technology. Amazing. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm assuming you don't have necessarily positive view on things like Ozempic, Mounjaro, retatrutide, and all these things.
I don't have a automatically negative view of those things.
No?
I mean, I've seen people transformed by them. Some of them seem to have some interesting possible implications for neuroprotection. I just don't understand them well enough, right?
Sure.
Could I foresee a time in the next few years, maybe, where I would microdose tirzepatide, Mounjaro, or
Reta?
maybe Reta, right? I mean, I've seen friends who have opted to be like some of the first monkey shot into space with Reta, and
It kind of
doesn't
looks
seem
good.
great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they've lost a lot of muscle mass.
Well, isn't that
They've
true
lost a
for
ton of
like
muscle
just
mass.
losing weight?
What do you mean?
Like if you drop weight, and I'm speaking as 2 times X fat.
Yeah.
Every time I've lost weight, I've lost a lot of muscle, and it kind of happens. Like, sure, my body's going to look leaner and the muscles are going to look tighter because all the fat's gone.
Yeah.
But the size of any given muscle is smaller as a function of me just being in a caloric deficit.
You don't have to lose much muscle. In my experience, right? There's a guy named Martin Birkin who's written a lot on 16/8 fasting and combining it with weight training. And like, yeah, I mean, look, he will run a calculus on caloric deficit and so on. I think Lean Gains is the name of the website. I'm not sure it's active anymore. He was one of the first people to popularize 16/8 in a practical real life setting. And
That's 16 fasting, 8 eating. 8-hour eating window, 16-hour fasting, right?
yeah. And he was the first person to, with an active participant audience of thousands, to really codify 16/8 plus weight lifting and so on and so forth. So that I'm aware of. You don't need to lose a lot of muscle, but and losing a lot of muscle is a great way to get into a bit of a kind of body composition death spiral, right?
Yeah.
Like I know someone right now, well, one who's, I'll give you 2 examples, female friend and a male friend. Female friend has decided she wants to lose weight, right? Which is like part of the problem already. She's not differentiating. She hasn't done a DEXA scan. She doesn't know what she's starting with. So she's just using the scale, which is a very blunt instrument. It's like, look, if you're morbidly obese, fine, right?
Then there's enough to lose.
Right. But she has basically been starving herself, and she's eating salads with next to no protein. And like lo and behold, the numbers are going down. She also stopped weight training because she said, I'm too bulky already. Factually incorrect if we're talking about lean mass, but that was her impression. She's going to tank her metabolism, right? So probably going to see her thyroid markers and so on go in the wrong direction. And she's losing muscle mass, which means she's losing the engines of caloric consumption. And since she hasn't checked a couple of the boxes, right? Like figuring out starting point with body composition, using the wrong measurement tool, the way that she'll probably try to fix it if she plateaus is by doing what? Cutting more calories. And then it's like all is lost at a certain point. It becomes very hard to recover from. And that's part of the reason why people tend to, there are more reasons that we could get into if you want. There are lots of reasons. But one of the reasons that you look at the Biggest Loser, the TV show, and they're achieving the competition to lose as much weight as possible through basically starvation, caloric restriction. And they're sacrificing the long-term metabolic engine necessary to have durable body composition change that they want. So you don't need to, how should I phrase this? I would just say this: you don't need to automatically lose a lot of muscle. My friend, who I'm talking about, even at very low dose Retta, just finds it almost vomit-inducing to look at food. So he's just not consuming enough food or protein, which is a pretty common problem on these drugs. And he's just like wasting away, right? He makes a joke of it, and like he'll correct course. He's not going to stay on it, but he's just like, wow, interesting. Yeah. He's like, if I want to embrace heroin chic again, he's like, I'm almost there. And I was like, yeah, maybe not a good look for you. So, but I do think these drugs are super interesting. And I've had conversations with people at Eli or Lilly, I guess they're called Eli, and others about these drugs. Like, I do think they're very interesting. I don't have any like sort of dogmatic objection to these things. I just don't know enough about them, and there are other things that I want to fine tune in my own behavior and my own sort of quiver of things I'm using before I screw around with those. Right. So I'd be much more interested in testing like low dose rapamycin, like cyclical use of rapamycin with certain types of high intensity interval training to see what type of volumetric changes I can observe in the brain, if any, right? For increasing like hippocampal volume, right? Because I have tons of Alzheimer's in my family. It freaks me out. So that's a more interesting experiment for me than taking Retta right now.
Right. Yeah. What other experiments are you fascinated by? Are you thinking of any?
I'm always interested in, I because of the neurodegenerative diseases in my family, which are all over the place, that stuff scares me more than like
almost anything
getting
else.
Weak and losing your mind. And your personality and your identity is, I've seen it happen now multiple times, just terrifying. So for me, I'm most interested in, this may not answer your question directly. I guess I could answer it directly. Like, there are certain tools that do not involve pills and potions and injections, whether that's types of brain stimulation, like
TCMS, TCDS?
Yeah, TMS, accelerated TMS, could be something like focused ultrasound. I'm an investor in a company. Can I say it publicly? We'll have to just check this in post.
We'll just beep the names out of all companies that you've said as a policy. It'll be easier for you.
Yeah. Well, if I can mention them, I'd love to mention them. But I'll just mention it. But Ferrion is what they're called. They're working on, they just finished a clinical trial. They put it up publicly, so it's available publicly. But they're looking at it. They're developing a headset that, if it works as they hope, should reduce neuroinflammation. Okay, so I think that, and I'm not the only one, I'm borrowing from much more credible people, but I think a lot of the psychiatric disorders and possibly there's some explanatory power when we look at, say, rife Alzheimer's disease, which is a tricky diagnosis in some ways in people who are, say, ApoE33, who shouldn't be predisposed based on that risk factor. Looking at how does past acute infection correlate to some of this stuff, right? Like schizophrenia is an interesting one, like neonatal infection in the mother, stuff like that. Can you address neuroinflammation or improve something like glucose metabolism in a way to address something like Alzheimer's, or maybe even intervene earlier? Clotho would be like the kind of
Hail Mary.
That would be the godsend. So, I mean, hopefully that'll come through. I think it probably will, and it'll take a while. But what are things you can do? Like, if you have Alzheimer's in your family or something like it, it's not like somebody hits 75 or 80 and then it suddenly happens. And it's like, presumably the changes that are so common in my family, if they're going to happen, are already happening in my brain, right, at 48. And probably start even earlier. I mean, one might argue. So it's like, okay, what can you do now? Right? Well, it's like, I'm probably not going to do something super aggressive, like go get infusions of something like donanemab, right? Like, just like the risk profile is too spooky for me. Maybe later, like It's entirely possible in 5 or 10 years, you might do that like once a quarter or twice a year or something preventatively to reduce or increase amyloid plaque clearance and stuff, right? Based on a podcast and some conversations with Matt Walker, who wrote Why We Sleep, I swapped out one of my, I was taking some sleep medication because I have back pain with something called Adora. So in this case, I was using Belsomra, but the class is Dora, dual orexin receptor antagonist. Seems to help also with amyloid and maybe even tau clearance. So it's like, okay. This headset, right? Is it something that if it helps people with, say, long COVID, and if we could attribute some of their symptoms to neuroinflammation, which I think is the case for a lot of people, could you basically get like ketosis in a headset for older people who are it wouldn't be responsible right now to try to give them exogenous ketos day in and day out. But headset, 15 minutes, a couple times a week. Okay, suddenly that's very interesting, right? Because the intermittent, I'm not going to get some old, elderly relative of mine to do intermittent fasting or the ketogenic diet. No way.
Are all men in your family predisposed to Alzheimer's? Or?
No, it's not all men. But
it's significant enough to.
It's a lot of men and women.
Oh, both men and women.
Oh yeah.
Okay, both ways, huh?
Yeah. So, these are some of the experiments, I guess you could say. I would love to. Ultimately, it would require, an IRB and all these approvals and everything else, but get these headsets for some of my relatives and see if there's any symptomatic improvement at all, right? Maybe not. There might be none. But I will say that with one of my relatives with pretty advanced Alzheimer's, gave them a single shot of, in this case, it was 11 grams, which is very low if you look at the case reports that have done the same thing. 11 grams instead of probably next time I would give 30 grams. 11 grams of exogenous ketone. In this case, a ketone monoester. So beta hydroxybutyrate bonded to this 1,3-butanediol. And within 20 minutes, faster speaking, longer sentences, it was
wow.
It was a near immediate change in function. And talking to one of the country's top neurologists who specializes in Alzheimer's to a large extent, he's seeing patients who try the clock test. This is sort of a easy, I don't know how much they use it anymore, but diagnostic for a stage of Alzheimer's, but they ask the person to draw a clock. Typically, they can't do it if it's reasonably advanced. It's just a mess. People can look this up. And give them a bunch of ketones. It's 30 minutes later, perfect clock. Okay, so that's interesting. I don't think it's a viable therapy to keep giving this to them nonstop for the liver concerns and other things. But I am very, very interested in bioelectric medicine, like this headset, right? So ultimately, a year or two or something from now, could I see using one of those myself? Potentially. Yeah, for sure. I can absolutely see that. Yeah. But for now, I'm focusing on subtracting because the risk is just less. Right. And subtracting meaning intermittent fasting, 3 days off a month, right? If you do a 3-day water fast, you're going to lose some muscle mass, right? But if you do a fast mimicking diet like that is espoused by Walter Longo, which is I think 600 to 750 calories a day, you get a lot of the benefits without totally fasting. And especially if you were to, like Dominic D'Agostino does, he'll have 2 or 3 cans of sardines or mackerel or something, and he'll do that for 3 days. And he's a big guy. He's 250 pounds, pure muscle. I think that's maybe 220. He's gigantic.
I've only ever heard his voice.
Yeah. He's a great guy. This is a big man.
Oh.
And 2 or 3 cans of fish is not a lot. They're this big.
Yeah.
And he doesn't lose muscle mass when he does that. So that's a mountain of a man to feed for tiny little cans of fish. So anyway, I'll stop talking now. But those are the types of experiments that I'm most interested in right now on a physiological level. Otherwise, if I can't pronounce it or I've never heard of it,
I'm not gonna touch it.
If it's brand new, I might touch it, but I'm going to let a lot of people try it first. So one of the benefits to me, this is a huge benefit, right? So before I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to wait for racehorses and then bodybuilders. Like, how am I even going to find these people? Okay, I'd have to figure out how to lurk on these message boards and like da da da. It's like now it's like, no, you got like
200 TikTok guys.
You got thousands of people are willing to fly to Honduras or whatever to get injected with, speculative gene therapy. I'm like, great. Like, can't wait to hear about it.
Right.
I'm going to wait though.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're almost running out of time. I must ask you, do you have any questions for me whatsoever?
Yeah. On the, this is going to be very hard turn from what we were just talking about. And I wouldn't know how to answer this for the US. But outside of the Indian government itself, what are the largest employers by sector in India?
Yeah, that's a very interesting
because I think about certain, and this is looking through a peephole at India, right? But like if I think about some of the associations that like a lay person in the United States might have, they're like, oh yeah, like call centers, customer service, lots of muscle power in terms of labor, right? But if I look at least what I just mentioned, like a lot of those are going to go away with AI.
Right.
And I wonder, with the recognition that from a policy perspective, like no one's going to cut it as a politician if they're suggesting something that's going to result in
jobs.
10% unemployment. There are global factors and market forces at play. Right. So I guess that's an indirective way of asking whether the policymakers want it or not domestically.
Yeah.
Like how destabilizing might AI be?
I'll give you, so the direct answer to your question, the literal answer to your question is actually the largest single employer on planet Earth is the Indian Railways.
Yeah.
That's a single company that employs the maximum number of
Didn't
people.
know. That's wild.
I don't know why I know this. I think I read some Guinness Book of World Record shit when I was a kid and it just kicked right in right now. That's one. But as far as sectors are concerned, look, I think the primary interaction that a lot of Americans have is with these call center type phenomena, but they're very recent. This has been about, I remember when I was a middle school kid, one of my older cousins was working at a call center and the family was asking, the fuck is a call center? It was such a strange idea because that's when the export had begun. There are IT services which employ, I think the statistic is 5% of India's GDP is IT services, and that's going to get hit very massively. Although it is unclear if it's going to get hit in dollar value terms or employment terms, because you'll still have need for software being coded. It just will be done by some kind of artificial intelligence as opposed to people. But I do also know that these companies are already restructuring themselves in the light of what they will need in the future because it's existential for them. They cannot collapse. These are multi-trillion-dollar institutions in certain ways. So I think honestly, there is no shortage of work to be done. For instance, infrastructure. It's an ever-building problem. You need more roads, more highways, more internet lines. You need more electricity. You need more energy. You need more everything in India because the population is just exploding. Unlike China, there is no recession in the population graphs, right? Things like education, for instance, massive need. And I think AI adoption itself will mean each room will have one employee that just manages AI happening to people as like an interfacer. So there are some short-term jobs available. I think a lot of Indians are employed in the convenience sector now, which is that if you're a certain amount of educated without being employable, you can just get my Uber Eats order for me. That's a huge population. There's multiple huge billion-dollar startups that do convenience tech. A lot of the tech landscape in India, domestic tech landscape, is a convenience landscape. So what can I get at home? And the way to understand it is that, in effect, the class sort of divide has used tech to help itself. So the rich just get things much easier and the poor gets job. The poor get job, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of works out in that way. I think if you had to hit India meaningfully in terms of employment, it would have to be hit in agriculture. And there is a reasonable case to be made that there's a lot of hidden unemployment within agriculture where like a family tends to a field where one person could. And so employment numbers are somewhat fudged because they effectively have 3 productive hours a day each, as opposed to one guy being employed in the field. And the way you see green revolution hitting America, and you have these thrusters and these threshers and these tractors and all that. The same is not true for India, in that we still needed people to work somewhere. And so I think about a good majority of India is employed in agriculture, which needs to be moved to either manufacturing or service-based sectors for it to prosper. If agriculture were to get automated in any meaningful way with AI, I don't know how that would be. I think Boston Dynamics and a few of these robotics companies would have to really pull up their game for physical labor to be manifested or like actuated using AI. I think manufacturing should be the next big one, factories. But I mean, if you start chasing that down, you realize nothing's quite safe.
Yeah.
Because you can have robots in factories tomorrow, dude. Like, you can have, I think all artificial intelligence.
China already has robots in hotels in some places.
Right. And so at that point, it really does look like in the short run, a lot of this will be unmanned. I think one of the bottlenecks people are not talking about is cost per query, which is that eventually to run these systems is going to get super expensive, and you might just say, hey, listen, he's just good enough for research. I don't need another query that takes away X amount of water and Y amount of dollars. Right now, the VC ecosystem kind of funds it, and that might at least slow down some of this unchecked advent. From a pure pragmatic lens, except say the IT services sector, I'm not that worried because the Indian DNA is a lot of like labor-centric, hard work. Kind of those values are the Indian DNA, and you probably see it with Indians here. They outperform because all they know is that work will set them, into a better life. That's all they know. Their kids know that. They're raised with that anxiety that if I don't study well and if I don't get into a good school, my life's ruined.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is a psychological fact about India is that the worst case outcome is at every red light that you can imagine. Every intersection that you stop at, you see the most poor person on earth. And so it's just very visible to you where you'll end up if you don't do it. I know you talk about fear quite a bit. I think it's this unconscious fear registration that if I fail, I might end up extremely poor. And so just people work harder in general, especially immigrants that make it out.
For sure.
So I think there's a few things that kind of interact. I don't think Indian Railways are going to get hit by AI at all, dude. That's a really man-to-man. It's one of those things where the problem is so complicated and the human touch is so heavy. I don't think an AI is ready to bargain for tickets or like ignore somebody who's not brought a ticket and that kind of stuff. So it's a much more colorful atmosphere. It's less rule-driven in certain ways and a lot more convenience-driven. And I think humans therefore remain as part of the equation. But I am worried for here and for all the people that move out here from my country. Jobs are just going to be hard, and you might want to get into a McKinsey or a BCG, but if between Excel and Claude the work is done, I'm sorry, boss, you're going to have to be fired very soon. And those risks are much more real. I do hope it's a temporary disorientation period. I think 10 years going to get a little weird, but then it might stabilize. That's how I think about it, at least.
Indian Railways, I'm long.
Right, I'm long on Indian Railways too, dude. Well, thank you so much, brother. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I'm so glad I got to see you, and I'm so glad we could have this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise, yeah. Welcome to Austin.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.